Welcome back to Regency Rumors. I'm Kayla, and here on my channel, I talk about period dramas, history, and historical fiction. And I'm finally doing a video on historical fiction because apparently it's not doing so well. So I was suggested this article on Book Riot called The Unmaking of the Historical Romance Genre, and I was shocked at what I read. Some of what I would consider to be the top historical romance authors are being told that their next books are either not going to be published whatsoever, or they've been told that they have to pivot and write romantasy or historical romantasy in order to survive. In this video, I'm going to talk about the decline of historical fiction, why this could be happening, what we can do about it if you love historical fiction like I do, and what that could mean for some of us, myself included, who have always dreamed of publishing historical fiction. So I grew up in the days when Fabio and his luscious hair is what dominated historical fiction. Well, historical romance. You could go into Walmart and there would just be like rows and rows of historical romances with bare-chested men and bodice-ripped women on the cover. And besides some big crime novels and some contemporary, that is what was flying off the shelves at the time. In terms of volume, they were really accessible in bookstores, in grocery stores, and department stores. Like you could just grab one while you were checking out alongside a bar of candy. They were stories of grand estates, forbidden love, earls and dukes, and sometimes pirates. And lots of primarily women read them in small paperback form. Now, a lot of those covers have changed over time. It's less of an 80s photo shoot and kind of a more of like an animated vibe for the covers. And I think that is to attract the same crowd of people who are reading contemporary fiction. So a lot of the Regency romance novels, they have switched to being like this. And I was looking on my shelf to see if I had any like bodice ripping ones, and I don't, unfortunately, but I'll put one on the screen. But they've changed to be more like this, which matches the vibe of like contemporary romance, right? Like the only difference between these two types of covers is the fact that you can clearly tell that these people are in historical garb, and still this is more of like a contemporary view of what we think of Regency romances, right? Like she's kind of got the Elizabeth Bennet hairstyle from the 2005 Pride and Prejudice going on, and so you can really tell this is contemporary. This is a Georgette Heyer book that I think was from, I don't know, early 2000s or something, so this isn't bodice ripper, but it's much more of like a early 2000s 90s vibe than ones that are being printed and then reprinted for some of these romance authors that were really popular in the 80s and 90s. And that includes Julia Quinn and Bridgerton and Mary Balogh and a lot of these Regency romance authors who at one time had these kind of old school, sometimes cheesy looking covers, and now they have been updated to match the market. And so sometimes people are rediscovering them, but apparently not enough. I am coming to terms with the fact that the genre is in trouble, and I had no idea about it because I just keep reading them. But book publishers are dropping historical reads left, right, and center. Wrong window. Can you tell that I spend all my time either watching period drama clips or reading these? Okay, there we go. So the article says, I was told I should go in a new direction for my options, says Joanna Lowell, who will finish her current contract with her sapphic historical, a rare find, this June. I haven't even tried. I know a dozen historical romance authors who have not had their contract renewed or had their series cut in the middle of it, says Adriana Herrera, author of the Las Leonas trilogy that concluded this year. I found that readers still have an appetite for my stories, says author Mimi Matthews. I really enjoy her books. I have, however, recently learned that some retail outlets are ordering less historical romances, so that definitely might have an impact on my success of my new release, Rules for Ruin. Publishers are gun-shy about historicals right now. It's very clear that those of us who have been writing historical for a long time are either not having our contracts renewed or we are sort of being coached or guided towards other avenues, says Sarah McLean. clean. So I've read a couple of Joanna Lowell's books and Mimi Matthews, and I guess because when you go to buy a book online or you see it on a shelf at the store, you're like, oh cool, here's the thing that I love to read. And obviously we are algorithm to death. So you just assume that because what you enjoy is in front of you on social media or on a platform like Amazon, if you buy your books from Amazon, that like they must be doing fine. Because when I was back in the US in May, I saw Joanna Lowell's books in every bookstore. It was recommended everywhere, and it was on the main selling tables in Barnes and Noble, and some independent stores as well. And then there are new authors popping up all the time. One author that I've fallen in love with is Alexander Vasti, I think, who has numerous Regency romance novels published, and like a couple that are coming out that you can pre-order in the next couple of years. I've also seen her books in a lot of places. So really personally confused, like the appearance of things is that it's doing just fine. I haven't even gotten to other historical fiction genres and how they're doing, but I will. So what is going on? Why is historical fiction losing ground? I think a couple of things have happened to where there is this shift. I personally think this all started back with like Twilight and fantasy becoming way more mainstream in the romance genre. So I feel like that opened a door back then to where fantasy was less niche in romance and readers started to expect it more and more. I feel like with the growth of Bookstagram and Booktok and then spicy fiction in general, out popped Romantasy, and it is just steadily grown and grown up until COVID, where there was a huge boom. So what is Romantasy and why is it booming? Romantasy is romance and fantasy together, and it is dominating the bestseller lists. Because I'm new to fantasy because of this boom and, you know, me wanting to be able to connect with other readers, I've joined a book club that's for fantasy, and I'm enjoying some of these romantasy books. Like I am enjoying them. Okay, I'm trying. No, I'm enjoying them. But I'm always going to be a historical fiction girly over anything else, 100% till the day that I die. But in the past, fantasy as a genre was dominated by a lot of male authors, male readers as well. And now Romantasy has really brought a lot more female readers into the fantasy space, to where you go to the fantasy section in bookstores and what is front and center is Romantasy. And then, you know, everything else is still there. But it's become a huge section in that genre in a way that's kind of redefining what people think of when they think fantasy. And it's definitely shifting, and fantasy is becoming more mainstream for a bigger audience than ever before. If you're writing Romantasy and you've got any sort of success with it, like you're doing really well. So think high emotional stakes, magic, court intrigue, heroines who can fight or use bows and arrows, Hunger Games, but with dragons, all wrapped up in a romance, usually with a strong male lead who's grumpy, tall, dark, and handsome, and like 500 years old. Top authors are Sarah J. Maas, Rebecca Yarros, and Carissa Broadbent, who are driving this boom, with publishers now actively seeking more romantasy titles than pretty much anything else. The genre speaks to readers craving female empowerment, action and adventure, like high drama and saucy romance. Some are blaming it on readers' attention spans shifting. You know, long immersive historical novels can feel like a commitment in a world of fast entertainment. Meanwhile, learning about a brand new world where people can have superhuman powers because they are elves or fairies or can fight creatures, which is way more exciting than like shucking corn in the Wild West. So I get it. And, you know, it's a more romantic style of escapism than going back 200 years ago when women couldn't have their own bank accounts or going to college. So, you know, I don't blame people for kind of shifting their interest. And the publishing data on historical fiction just feels so brutal. So I found this on Reddit, and it's this graph of how much historical fiction is being picked up by publishers compared to everything else, I think. This poster. Is that what you call people? Poster on Reddit? Can you tell that I don't go on Reddit? They said, like many of you, I've watched with dismay as historical romance authors Harper St. George, Liana de la Rosa, Elizabeth Everett, and more all announced recently their publishers declined to pick up additional historical. As a huge historical romance fan, I found this devastating. As a reporter, I found it a fascinating story. Jane Friedman kindly let me report on the trend for her hot sheet newsletter. Some key findings. Of the more than 80 romances acquired by leading publishers Avon, Berkeley, Canary Street, Forever, Kensington, St. Martin's, and Sourcebook in 2024, just 7 were historicals, according to Publishers Marketplace deal reporters. So there's the graph here. Historicals, 8.4%, non-historicals, 91.6%. So that's not great. As someone who is writing their first Regency romance novel, am I in trouble? Like, am I wasting my time? What's happening? Are people not going to read my books if I write them? Okay. In terms of other types of historical fiction, the kind of traditional, like historical mystery, Agatha Christie style, golden age whodunits, they're also in decline, apparently. Literary historical fiction has always sold less than like big sweeping historical romances and other genre fiction. So I don't know how much that has been affected. There's always a bit of, more of a niche audience with literary historical novels, which is a shame because I've read plenty of kind of in the very traditional sense of historical fiction, where like a book is based on someone's life and then the writer has parsed together fiction in order to put together an account of their life. Those have been more niche for a long time, but I really enjoy a lot of those novels. You learn so much history through them, so it's a shame that some of them don't get the recognition that they should get. So medieval novels and westerns used to be a huge genre, and while they're still here, they don't have as much influence as they used to. So like westerns were huge, I think anywhere from like the 60s and 70s. Obviously people still read them, but they are not flying off the shelves like they used to. What does not make any sense to me, and what I cannot wrap my head around, is the absolute difference in the growth of period dramas and the decline in historical fiction. I was excited if Masterpiece Theater made a small budget period drama every 5 years that you'd have to catch on like PBS on a random Sunday night. And now period dramas have had this massive boom. After Downton Abbey, Bridgerton has become massive, and so many period dramas have been greenlit. Like, we are coming out of our ears with period dramas right now. The Gilded Age, Buccaneers, New Emma, New Little Women, Persuasion, New Pride and Prejudice is coming out. New Wuthering Heights, New Sense and Sensibility. I just did a video on that one and what we know about this new adaptation coming out. Then it just shows how popular that they are and how much people want to go back in time on the screen. And I just had this assumption that in terms of historical romance, at least, Bridgerton gave it this huge boost. Also shows like Outlander, right? Like that it was fine, but that it was at least with shows like that coming out that the book genre was also in this huge boom because so many people were watching Bridgerton or Outlander and then discovering these historical romance authors, and it was creating this stir, but apparently not enough. I don't know what's going on because I just figured that, like myself, who watches period dramas all the time and then reads a lot of historical fiction, that those people would be the same. And I'm sure there's tons of people like me that do read historical fiction and watch period dramas, but it feels like for the market, like they're watching the period dramas because shows like The Gilded Age are huge. They're not reading it. Like the numbers are not correlating over in a massive way, and I'm shooketh. I'm shocked. I think what's happened because Bridgerton is not a straight up period drama, like, let's be honest, it's not technically fantasy, but it is fantasy-esque in its aesthetics, that people associate Bridgerton more with books like A Court of Rose and Thorns. Rose and Thorns? A Court of Thorns and Roses. I've read the book. I have a form of dyslexia. Anyways, I think people associate Bridgerton more with ACOTAR than they would with like The Gilded Age or Downton Abbey. It's become like a visual gateway into stylized, often ahistorical stories with fantasy elements, lavish costumes, diverse casting, and modern music. Bridgerton satisfies the desire for historical aesthetics without the historical baggage. It blurs the line between period drama and fantasy escapism. And I'm not mad about it. Like as a historian, I don't see anything wrong with that in something like Bridgerton, because people need escapism sometimes, and they want to be able to see diverse people like themselves being represented on screen as the people in the lavish ball gowns and as the people who have power in the court. So I am not against it with Bridgerton whatsoever, but all that to say is I think that there is more of a reason why people are obsessed with Bridgerton and reading Romantasy than they would about reading historical fiction. Someone went on to say that a bit in the first comment here, and I thought that was really interesting. So I'm just going to put this quote that they've said here. So, as someone whose favorite subgenre is historical romance, it saddens me but doesn't surprise me. I think the first issue is truly publishing refuses to invest in marketing. Historical romance was always going to need more marketing as the general education levels of the primary American audience dropped. Okay, that's a bit of a read. Yeah, authors have reported getting feedback from readers that they see historical romance as a history lesson, essentially. Great marketing could have solved this, but instead they relied on Bridgerton to do the work when Shondaland seemed only vaguely interested in marketing the show as a romance versus a Gossip Girl drama. Never mind that the first historical romances the viewers picked up was naturally Bridgerton, which is older and dated and frankly not super well loved by a lot of historical romance diehards. It's not a great example of what historical romance can be, so they dismissed historical romance. I'm going to be honest and say that I somewhat agree with this in the sense that reading Bridgerton for the first time after watching the show, because that's where I found out about Bridgerton as well. I'd read other Regency romance authors, but Bridgerton in particular I read because of the show. And I think that there's a lot of outdated themes in Bridgerton, are a lot of storylines that I was uncomfortable with, especially with the male leads, ridiculous tropes and wild storylines that would not be there today, or that it makes a lot of sense as to why the show decided to get rid of them. The hard thing with Bridgerton being a gateway to other historical romances is that because they were written, I think, 25 years ago, a lot of people read them and went, oh my gosh, the Anthony in this, not so great. Or, ugh, Colin in the books is terrible. And so they went, this genre is not for me. I could understand that. There are some things that I didn't agree with or didn't like or felt really icky about some of the characters in these books that were written 20 years ago. And I could see how if you are a new reader and you have the option of either choosing Romantasy, where a lot of that stuff doesn't happen, or a historical romance that was written 20 years ago, you're going to choose the new Romantasy that doesn't have some of these problematic issues. Fantasy offers historical vibes with none of the bad historical constraints, or at least different ones that don't, connect with real life historical trauma that could be personal for a lot of people. I think there are some of us that love attention to historical detail, cultural customs or historical accuracy, but time and time again, they're not upheld in period dramas. And I'm not saying that they have to all the time, but I think those of us that wish they were more often are in more of a minority than we think. And so that has affected how general audiences view the past, because their visual representation of history is primarily through period dramas nowadays and social media. So they link historical time periods with a lot of aesthetically pleasing vibes than there actually would have been. What your focus is on the gorgeous gowns and the big dances and the meals and stuff like that. And so that is what sticks in your brain about a time period, which I would argue is far more fantastical in nature than it is connected to history. This Book Riot article and a couple other articles that I will link in the description indicated that perhaps new readers aren't interested in historical romance because it lacks diversity, or, you know, the romance is slow, or because the language feels too oldie worldy, and I get it, but they feel like they have to learn a history lesson just to read a book. As someone who feels like sometimes it's intimidating to read fantasy with all the new stuff you have to learn about other worlds and creatures you've never heard of and curses and magical spells and lore, etc. I personally don't see how historical fiction is any different than that, but I guess it could be a lot less exciting. I guess because I have been exposed to historical fiction since the time I was reading like American Girl novels, so I have a lot of context for different time periods that I personally read in. I can get that because I have wanted to read some more like ancient historical fiction, and sometimes I struggle with those because I know way less about like the Roman Empire or specific time periods in ancient Egypt, and so I will sometimes struggle with those kinds of books. So I can totally empathize with not wanting to try out historical fiction because of that. I think because I've also read fantasy, and there can be so much world building in those that I find like you are learning about a new history of a completely different world that I don't know that I understand the argument. Like I don't know. Yeah. But as a history nerd, I am biased, so maybe I need to get over it. The truth is that there is a diversity problem in historical romance, both in who writes it, in the characters, in the stories. They are mostly around white upper class characters, especially for romances. Read the article because it's got some great quotes from authors who have found out their readers don't want to learn something new, or they have preconceived notions that it'll be regressive or it's not diverse. Even though there have been an uptick in diverse authors publishing historical fiction and way more varied stories recently, it is a shame that that is under threat because of publishers cutting book deals, you know, right here when diverse authors are starting to tell more varied stories than they ever have before. Can historical fiction bounce back? Yes. I am struggling with the state of the world at the minute, and then you're telling me that they're publishing less historical fiction, especially less historical romance, which is my form of escapism. Just know that if we have an apocalypse, I am one of those people that, like, I'm not fighting. I will be reading my historical romances in bed. That will be the end of me. I am not going to be traipsing a big, you know, box of books around the world to a safety point, because that is going to be, you know, my only comfort. And that's not happening. So, just know I died happy reading my book in bed. I do think that there are lessons that can be learned for why people are not reading historical fiction. With fantasy, characters from lower class backgrounds can succeed. Women can be in places of power. They can have a bit of adventure. They're taken seriously. For a lot of the injustices in fantasy, there are solutions. Certain countries are freed after wars, adventurers find their way home, and a lot of times the good guys win. With history, we know for a lot of it, that's not the case. So maybe a lot of people don't want to read about that. I think a lot more people are cognizant of injustices in the world and wish for escapism. Some of the best historical fiction I've read lately have been exciting. You know, women have been establishing their own magazines, running their own businesses, trying to challenge laws, and shining a bit of a light on what was happening, but in a very uplifting way. And also falling in love with exciting, empathetic, emotionally mature men who don't want to control women, or, you know, don't have possessive tendencies, which, by the way, if we are being petty, and I do enjoy romantasy. But now that I am reading more of it, there is a lot of like possessive male characters in romantasy, and like not in a healthy way. It feels kind of toxic, and it's not for me. It's just, it's not for me. I think the problem is that poster on Reddit was saying, and the article from Book Riot, there's not been much marketing shifts with historical fiction to show that new stuff is being written now that challenges the norms, is trying to empower characters, or highlighting injustices people have never read about from the past. There's so many cool ways I've seen authors write characters that were inspired by, say, real women who were entrepreneurial when we thought women were not able to, or they ran estates when we thought women were not allowed to do that, or they were sitting around doing needlework, or a person of color got into an industry we didn't think that they could rise up to during the 18th century. I just don't know that the publishers are putting in the work to scream out like, hey, our new historical fiction is different now than complete rakes with pregnancy tropes and only white straight people in it. It feels like people still feel like the way a lot of the historical romances were written in the 70s or 80s is the way that they're written now, and that's just not true. I was blown away to see Amelie Howard being told by her publisher that they would no longer be publishing her historical novels. So she's having to self-publish her next one and write a historical romantasy, I believe. I think her books are so clever. They're Regency romances based on rom-coms. So there is one that's based on Pretty Woman, 10 Things I Hate About You, and Clueless. I was just like, she's got such a winning idea, blending genres, that I am shocked. I'm shocked about that one, honestly. I've read all three of them and they're popular. Like, I think a lot of people online really enjoy them because they're unique and contemporary. So I don't understand. I don't understand. Authors who innovate, blend genres, or focus on underrepresented histories may find loyal audiences, which someone like Amelie Howard has. It's really unfortunate for the people still trying to build a base of readers, especially underrepresented authors. I do think it's important to push back a little on the idea that reading or writing romantasy is somehow more virtuous because it avoids the problematic past. Like, it's not necessarily a pat on the back to say, well, I don't engage with historical fiction because I don't want to deal with colonialism or racism or sexism, etc. That's a valid personal choice, but it doesn't automatically make the genre better or more ethical. Choosing fantasy worlds where these things don't exist isn't the same as confronting the realities of history. If anything, it just means you're working within a different framework. It's escapism, not education, and that's totally fine. Like I've been saying about Bridgerton, I read escapism a lot. For our mental health, we need a break, but I think let's not pretend it solves anything or is somehow superior. In the same way, it's important not to shame people for reading romantasy, and there's been a lot of that going on, especially when the primary readership of this new boom in this type of fantasy is primarily women. I think it's also important not to make it seem like some genres are better than others. So that's my little rant about historical fiction. Please don't come for me. Is historical fiction dead? Of course not. But books are starting to feel a bit like fast fashion. Everyone wants the next big trend, the next viral trope, and they want it now. Platforms like Booktok, they've made reading more about the hype and the aesthetic than the substance, I feel like sometimes. And while that's fun, it doesn't leave a lot of room for slower, more detailed genres like some historical fiction. Historical fiction doesn't always fit this rapid consumption model. The best of historical fiction, I think, requires research. It requires time to really dive into what it would have been like back then. But instead, books with spicy tropes can grab more attention in the algorithm-driven marketplace. And then as a result, historical fiction can seem outdated, not because it lacks quality, but because it isn't built for speed. And this is not me like knocking down romantasy or more spicy books at all, because obviously a lot of historical fiction can be spicy. I just mean that there's a lot of chat about fast fashion in the book world right now that is being driven by romantasy, where they are wanting a checklist of the type of things that they are going to see in a book, enemies to lovers, or only one bed trope or whatever in the end. And sometimes I think historical fiction is just not going to fit into those boxes in a way that can be commercialized to that level anymore. And maybe that's a part of why it's not standing the test of time. So while historical fiction might not be dominating the charts right now, it is far from dead. Like, there are still authors being published, they're still making money, and some are even doing it full time. It's It's easy to get caught up in the idea that you have to be the next Sarah J. Maas to be successful, but that's just not true. Musicians, plenty of artists make a steady, full-time living from music without ever coming close to Taylor Swift's level of fame. Publishers are out to make the most money possible as quickly as possible, but that doesn't mean that historical fiction authors can't make a considerable amount of popularity with a loyal audience. There's still space for historical fiction and the writers and readers who care about it. Like, there has to be, because I want to continue reading it and I eventually want to write it. So please. Thanks for watching. What do you think? Do you think historical fiction is in trouble? Are you finding yourself reading less historical fiction? And if so, why? Would you read a period drama inspired Regency meets Outlander type, but with the framework of Planet of the Barbarians meets Bridgerton series? Can you tell I'm still plotting this and I don't know what I'm doing with it, but would you read it? Okay, bye.